Once, in a quiet town that no longer exists on any map, lived an old craftsman known as Elias Gibbens. Elias wasn't a mere clockmaker. His creations weren't just clocks. They were masterpieces of gears, dials, and ticking precision that seemed almost alive. Townsfolk whispered about his skills. People traveled from distant lands to own one of his clocks. Why? Because everyone agreed they never lost time. Not a second, an instant, or even the briefest breath. But some claimed that Elias's clocks didn't just keep time, they held it captive. Rumors began to spread that his clocks influenced the flow of time, or worse, manipulated it. Of course, this was dismissed as superstition. After all, Elias was a quiet man, fragile in his demeanor, more likely to be found with a magnifying glass in his hand than spinning tales. But we all know how often the quiet ones hide the loudest secrets. Then came the day he disappeared. But here's the strange part. His shop remained open. No one ever saw him leave. No one saw him return. But somehow the clocks always stayed remarkably tuned, precise, and almost too perfect. A newcomer to the town, a young woman named Lorna, who worked at the local inn, grew curious. On her days off, she'd linger outside Elias's workshop. The faint clicking of gears inside seemed almost to speak, whispering something just beyond her grasp. Eventually, curiosity turned to obsession. One night, right on the turn of midnight, Lorna couldn't hold back any longer. The door to the shop stood slightly ajar, a faint golden glow flickering from within. Against every ounce of reason, she stepped inside. The first thing that greeted her was silence, followed by an overwhelming chill, then the sudden clear ticking of a grand clock mounted on the far wall. Each clock seemed to sync in perfect unison, and for a moment, the ticking echoed her heartbeat. She felt time stretch long and then compress. Moments seemed to last forever and vanish all at once. And as she made her way deeper inside, she stumbled upon something impossible. Elias, sitting as perfectly still as a wax figure, his hands poised over a clock he wasn't assembling, but rather disassembling. His lips moved faintly, too quietly for anyone to hear. "What are you doing?" she demanded. But Elias didn't answer, didn't even look up. Instead, without touching a single lever or pendulum, the clocks around the room erupted in an astonishing cacophony. The ticking became a deafening roar. "Leave. Leave before it binds you," Elias finally rasped, his voice like breaking glass. But it wasn't anger that painted his features. It was sorrow, immeasurable and boundless sorrow. Then came the revelation that tore through Lorna's very existence. None of the clocks in the room displayed the correct time, not even close. Each seemed to show something more sinister: tragic dates, moments of chaos, loss, painful memories that belonged to people Elias had never met. Or perhaps he had. Horrified, Lorna stumbled backward and knocked into a clock unlike any other. Its numbers weren't numbers, but runes, glowing faintly with an emerald light. And across its intricate brass face was one empty word: her name. The letters shifted, becoming as clear as day. Lorna. She froze. As Elias turned slowly, lethargically, as if gravity itself tormented him, he whispered, "Every craftsman's masterpiece exacts its price. My masterpiece was time itself, and I became its prisoner." His words cut through the golden light. He explained how long ago he constructed the clock, a creation birthed from obsession. But he hadn't just perfected timekeeping. He'd snapped time's leash entirely. The clock devoured more of him with every gear he turned, until he existed nowhere, except within the confines of his clock's eternal dominion. And now, it was looking for a new keeper. The room grew suffocating. The tick-tocks ceased altogether. Nothingness filled the air, and nothingness broke with a deafening silence as the emerald-lit clock suddenly came to life. Lorna raced toward the door, but as she glanced back, her hand stalled on the handle. Elias whispered something she'll never forget. "Time isn't a line. It's a trap. Be careful where you tread." But as she threw herself into the night, she realized the town she had spent months calling home had vanished. The cobblestone streets now rolled out into a dense forest. The inn where she worked, gone, dust in the wind. She glanced at her wrist, gasping for relief, at her own wristwatch. It now read a date 50 years ahead of anything she recognized. And when she closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting out a shaky breath, she heard it again, the low, rhythmic tick of her name, whispered amongst the passage of time. The sound of a cursed legacy, forever chasing her, promising she'd one day return to relieve Elias.